Hey guys, what's up? My name is Midnight Strike 3625 and I have a question for you guys that I've been pondering over the last few days, and that is, what is your least favorite decade in music? Now this could be because, your favorite band broke up, they started releasing subpar content that soon turned into quality content in the succeeding decades, but be it whatever the reason may be, I want to know, and I want to have a bit of discussion in the comments section going on, and that's the reason why I make these topic videos. And of course, I will give my own perspective, my own thoughts on the worst decade in music, or at least my least favorite decade from the 70s on. So, my least favorite decade from the 70s on would have to be the 90s. And I say this not because I hate grunge, not because I hate bands such as the Foo Fighters or Pantera or Dream Theater that rose to prominence in the 90s, but just because of all of my favorite bands practically, or a lot of my favorite bands, started on a downward decline, releasing subpar content, radically different content, and they started trying to change with the times per se. So I was actually thinking about this more so when I was listening to Queensryche. Now, I tried listening to Promised Land, and then I tried listening to what was the other one? Here in the Now, Frontier, Q2K, all those. I just could not get into them for the life of me. And then I started to think, the 90s was kind of a bad era for music if you didn't like grunge, or alternative rock, so for that matter. So, and I say that because if you look at bands such as Iron Maiden, who were doing really well in the 80s, but then once the 90s roll around, they just start releasing subpar material, such as No Prayer for the Dying, and maybe the X Factor was good. I'll have to give that a listen, but I've heard Virtual 11, that's pretty bad. Bands such as Anthrax, who in the early 90s, like I said, early 90s, released pretty good material, but then once it got into the later 90s, they released two duds before the 2000s rolled around, with their singer John Bush, of course. So, a lot of bands were going through some hardships. I could name off, at least 6 or 7 different bands that had their worst stint in the 1990s, and I don't know if this is just a trend or a coincidence, or just the way it was going with the times and the music development, or the music evolution, mind you, but, I don't know, it's just too big to really ignore in my mind. I like bands like Pantera, Dream Theater, of course, who doesn't really like Dream Theater if you're into metal, but, when it comes down to it, it just seems like the early 90s, 1990 through 1993, was the window for bands such as Bon Jovi, Metallica, what's another one? AC/DC, all those bands. They released pretty much their last really, really great masterpiece in that time frame. Or at least a lot of the bands that I listened to. Motley Crue had Dr. Feelgood in '89. That's basically it. So, a lot of bands like Poison and Europe kind of went out of fashion because of the growing trend and musical evolution in the grunge scene. So they even made jokes about it in movies, like The Rock, which is an epic, epic movie that I just saw a year ago or so, I want to say. Awesome movie. That aside, Sean Connery's a badass. Your best. Losers whine about their best. Winners go home and fuck the prom queen. You can't get enough of it. It's awesome. But anyways, I'm gonna cap it off right there. I personally think the 90s is my least favorite decade in music, but I want to know what you guys think. And with that, thank you very much. This is Midnight Strike 3625. The 90s are still awesome for some music, but others kind of flopping. Just saying. Keep calm and rock on.